Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Louie Jet Gampero. Louie Jet was one of the guys I considered most close to while I was in the street. In my opinion, he's what I would call the ultimate associate. And I say that in a good way because Louie was there no matter what. Whatever you needed of him, he was there for you. And he would go out of his way to do whatever was asked of him. Lou's an associate of Ray Argentina. Ray's a member of the Lucchese family. And Ray Argentina was always known to be the partner of Louie Jet. Louie Jet went on to be the acting boss for the Lucchese family in 2001. And it was during that same year that Louie Jet and Ray was indicted for racketeering, something to do with mortgages. In that same indictment, Louie Jet was charged for assaulting 2 mortgage brokers. But at some point, Ray and Louie had a falling out. And Louie spotted Ray wearing a wig walking around by his house. He had told me, I know he was laying on me to try to kill me. I believe Louie served about 8-9 years in federal prison for that case. One of the guys that he was away with was Johnny Caniglia, a well-known Gambino captain. One day Louie assaulted a guy who earlier had disrespected Johnny Canig. But when Johnny Canig found out what Louie did, he reprimanded him. Louie told me that he said to him, I don't need you to fight my battles, don't ever do that again. And if you do, I'll put an ice pick in your head and scramble your brains. But they did get along good after that, and Louie was his handball partner. Although Louie was an associate with the Lucchese family, Louie's brother Charlie Jett is a member of the Gambino family. And there's a few brothers that I know of that are members of different families. Charlie Jett is close to Nicky Carrazzo, a Gambino captain who was slated to be the boss at one time. So Charlie's a part of his crew. Louie Jet became close to another Gambino captain, Lenny Di Maria. As a matter of fact, in 2017, Louie and I both attended a birthday party for Lenny out in Long Island in a restaurant. The first time I met Louie Jet, I was with Johnny Sideburns. A couple of days prior to that, someone stole all Sideburns tires off his Infiniti in front of his house. He wanted to have locks installed on the rims, so I took a ride with him to New Security. That was Louie's collision place out in Long Island. A funny side note is, when they robbed Sideburns tires, he was complaining that the FBI are all over Howard Beach, where he was living at the time, and how could anybody get away with stealing the tires in front of his house? So I told him maybe the agents took them. So that's how I met Louie Jet. I met him through Johnny Sideburns, and then a couple of days later I had to get something fixed on my own car, and I went back to see him. He had told me that later that night he was going to Bellanotte, which is a restaurant in Belmore, and if I wanted to stop by for a drink. Louie had another collision shop called Henig's, which was a few blocks away from Bellanotte. I stopped in the restaurant that night, and Louie introduced me to Butch Arpino and Danny Campo. They were both associates of Patty Della Russo. Since Ray Argentina was still in prison, Patty Della Russo claimed Louie Jet as well. But in reality, Butch was actually with Louie Jet, but because Louie Jet got life in prison, Patty claimed him too. After that night in Bellanotte, Louie, the guys, and myself started staying together more and more. But for me, Louie was the most likable guy out of all 3 of them. Louie would always make me laugh because he had Patty Della Rossa's number. He would always joke that Patty had an inferiority complex. But Patty really didn't treat Louie right. He was always being very abusive to him. I believe I mentioned in another video, I was in Bellanotte with Patty one night, and he was calling Louie Jet every name in the book and told me that he wanted nothing to do with Louie anymore. He was done with Louie. And then the next day, Louie Jet calls me and tells me that, oh, Patty was over, he got an oil change on his car. I just shook my head. Most of the problems that Louie Jet had with Patty was caused by Danny Campo. Danny would go to Patty and report everything like the little bitch that he was. In fact, one of the reasons why I stopped talking to Louie Jet has to do with Danny, but we'll get to that in a moment. So as I mentioned earlier, Louie was a very good associate. Understandably, his ultimate goal was to get straightened out. But there were times that he tried a little too hard. I remember we had a wake to attend in Brooklyn, and Louie was attending as well. I was running late that day, and I missed the first viewing. All the guys, including Big John and Joe Cafe, both captains in the family, went to go eat lunch after the first viewing in Tommaso's. But by the time I arrived, lunch was over, but I did go to the bar and have a drink with everybody, including Louie Jet. At some point, Big John walked over to me to say that he met Louie and he thought Louie was a nice guy. Then he turns around and says, "You know, I feel bad. He picked up the check." I was so pissed off when I heard that, because Louie was a guest and they should have never let him pay that check. When I ran into Louie later that night, I told him how I felt, and I told him you shouldn't have done that. Okay, so back to the incident involving Danny. At the very end of my time in that life, Danny Campo was so far up Patty's ass it wasn't funny. And it was apparent to everyone around us. He was bad-mouthing Louie to Patty on a daily basis back then. And in turn, Patty was treating Louie like shit. Louie even stopped coming around after a while. When I did speak to Louie, he was cursing Danny nonstop, telling me what was going on, even to the point saying that he wanted to hurt Danny. And I was in full agreement with him. And Butch, who usually stood out of these things, told me one day that he didn't even like what Danny was doing. But one afternoon I get a call from Butch and he told me that the night before he was in Bellanote. He said Patty was in there naturally with his pet Danny, and after a while Louie Jet came walking in. Butch said he didn't know how Louie was going to act once he seen Danny, because Louie ranted about Danny to Butch as well. So I asked him how it went and he said, "You're not going to believe this." He said that Danny and Louie were kidding around with each other and play fighting, and at one point Patty told them to cut it out because people in the restaurant were looking at them. He said then Louie and Danny had drinks together for the rest of the night. He was surprised by this, and so was I. But after Butch told me how he was playing with Danny that night, I never spoke to him ever again. But I don't forget all the good times that we had, and I don't forget one particular incident. The very last meeting I ever had was with Joe Cafe. And this was before him going to Bellanote and playing around with Danny. So I spoke to Louie about this meeting that I was supposed to have with Joe Cafe, and Louie volunteered to go sit down the block with a shotgun in the car. I appreciated it, and I never forgot that he offered, but I didn't want to get him involved and possibly get him hurt. On July 9, 2017, Gambino member Richie Martino sent the Gambino captain Andrew Campos a message. The message was that Tow Truck was asking about a meeting. Tow Truck being a code word for Louie Jet. The following day, the FBI, who had been surveilling Campos, followed him to the Pelham Bay Diner in the Bronx and seen him meeting with Louie Jet. What they talked about is unknown. As I mentioned earlier, when I knew Louie, he was just an associate with the Lucchese family, and he has since been inducted. Back when I was in the life, I would have congratulated him on that. Presently, I only shake my head and I wonder, why at his age would he volunteer to put a bullseye on his back? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you could hit the like button, and I appreciate everyone that does. Okay, till the next time. Hope you enjoyed the story. If you would like to subscribe to this channel, you could do so down below. If you would like to subscribe to my other channel, Unlimited Substance Podcast, I'll add a link in the description to this video.